Chapter 1. The Ring and a Hasty Goodbye. Autumn in Brooklyn always had a gentle charm, as if the city decided to slow down with the crisp winds. Emma Watson, 24, sat in her usual corner of Devotion Cafe, where the aroma of roasted Colombian coffee mingled with dreamy indie music. She was buried in a thick medical textbook, studying for her NYU exams, but her eyes kept drifting toward the window, waiting. Daniel Rivera, the man who had made her heart race for the past 6 months, had promised to meet her after a startup meeting. Daniel, 26, walked in wearing a worn denim jacket and a bright smile. He wasn't the kind of man who turned heads in a room, but his deep brown eyes and the way he talked about revolutionizing real estate through technology always captivated Emma. He was the founder of a small startup, a housing app connecting renters with affordable places. But for now, the company had only 3 employees in a cramped office in Dumbo. "Sorry I'm late," he said, setting a latte in front of her. "The investor canceled again. 3rd time this week." Emma smiled and closed her book. "It's okay. I'm used to waiting for you." They had met by chance in this very cafe when Daniel accidentally spilled coffee on her notebook and awkwardly offered to buy her a drink to make up for it. Since then, they'd had quiet dates, walks in Central Park, old movie nights in Daniel's tiny apartment, where the scent of aged wood and the distant sound of traffic made for a strangely romantic backdrop. In 6 months, their love had bloomed like the crimson maples each fall. Daniel told her about his big dream, that one day his app would help people find homes without being gouged. Emma shared her dream of becoming a neurologist, hoping to save stroke patients like the grandmother she'd lost. They didn't have much money, but they had each other, and that seemed enough. One late October evening, Daniel took Emma to a quiet corner of Prospect Park. Under the dim glow of the streetlight, he knelt down, his hands trembling as he opened a small ring box. Inside was a vintage silver ring with a simple blue stone, faintly sparkling. "I got it from a pawn shop," he said shyly. "It's not a diamond, but I promise, one day I'll get you a better one. Emma, will you marry me?" Emma covered her mouth, her eyes brimming with tears. She nodded without hesitation. "Yes, Daniel. Whether it's this ring or not, I just need you." They embraced, the crunch of dry leaves beneath their feet syncing with their heartbeat. However, they agreed to keep it a secret. Daniel's startup was on the verge of collapse, and Emma still had 2 demanding years of med school. "Just between us," Daniel whispered, "until everything's stable." Their 6-month anniversary fell on a drizzly Saturday night. Daniel cooked a simple dinner in his apartment, spaghetti with tomato sauce and a bottle of cheap wine. They laughed and clumsily danced to Frank Sinatra playing from an old speaker. When candlelight flickered on the table, Daniel pulled Emma close and kissed her softly. "I love you," he said. And for the first time, they crossed the line of hugs and kisses. That night, in the small room with raindrops tapping the window, they gave each other everything: love, hope, and even their hidden fears. The next morning, Emma woke up smiling, but Daniel was already putting on his shirt. His phone rang nonstop. "It's the investors in Boston," he said tensely. "They want to meet today. If I miss it, the company could collapse." He kissed her forehead. "I'll be back tonight, Emma. We'll celebrate properly, I promise." She nodded, though unease stirred in her chest. "Be careful," she said, watching him rush out the door. Emma spent the whole day in her Greenwich Village apartment, studying and waiting. She wore the vintage ring, watching it shimmer under the desk lamp, imagining a future with him. By late afternoon, the doorbell rang. She ran to it, expecting Daniel, but standing there was Mark, her older brother. Mark, a former Marine, had just returned after 2 years stationed overseas. He wore a military jacket, his face rugged, but his smile warm. "Little sis," he exclaimed, pulling her into a tight hug. Emma burst into tears, hugging him at the doorway, uncaring of passers-by. "Why didn't you tell me you were coming?" she asked through tears. "Wanted to surprise you," Mark grinned. While they embraced, Daniel, back early from Boston, parked at the corner across the street. He held a bouquet of chrysanthemums and a red velvet ring box, ready to apologize for the rushed goodbye that morning. But when he saw her in another man's arms, his heart shattered. The man was tall, dressed in military gear, and Emma was crying in his embrace. Before Daniel could step forward, his phone buzzed. A message from Liam, his business rival who had once tried to buy out his startup, appeared. A blurry photo of Emma and Mark hugging, with the caption, "Looks like her man is back, buddy." Daniel's blood boiled. Liam had always mocked him as a broke dreamer and tried to sabotage him. The photo and what he saw felt like a knife to the chest. He thought about last night, the proposal, and wondered if it had all been a delusion. Ashamed of his humble situation, just a startup guy with nothing, compared to that tall, confident man, Daniel clenched the flowers in his fist and turned away. He didn't have the courage to ask Emma. He feared the answer. Emma brought Mark inside, telling him about life at NYU and her dream of becoming a doctor. She didn't mention Daniel, wanting to keep the engagement a secret as promised. When night fell, she called Daniel, but the number couldn't be reached. She tried texting, but the messages failed to send. Worried, she went to his apartment, but no one answered. By midnight, Emma sat on her sofa, the ring in her hand, her heart heavy. "He left after that night," she whispered to herself. The pain spread through her like the rain falling outside, her love dissolving with every drop. What she didn't know was that Daniel, in a cheap hotel room in Boston, had blocked her number and erased all contact to protect his shattered heart. He told himself he had to forget Emma, to let go of the dream of a shared home. But the diamond ring he had just bought to replace the old one still sat in his coat pocket, something he couldn't bring himself to throw away. You're watching Soul Stories, where every tale whispers of love, healing, and hope. If you believe that even the smallest act of kindness can change a life, and that love often arrives when we least expect it, don't forget to subscribe and be part of our journey. Now stay with us. The story is just beginning. Chapter 2, The Face in Times Square. It was a bright May morning in Manhattan, but Emma Watson could only feel the city's rush through honking horns and the swarm of passers-by. She walked briskly along the sidewalk in Times Square, a medical podcast playing in her earbuds, her white coat tucked into her backpack. As a neurology resident at Mount Sinai Hospital, Emma had learned how to lock away personal emotions, focusing instead on patients and grueling night shifts. But the scar from 5 years ago, when Daniel Rivera disappeared the night she gave him everything, still throbbed faintly in her heart. She stopped at the corner of 42nd Street, waiting for the light to change, her eyes drifting absently toward the glowing billboards above. Times Square was always a chaotic mosaic of lights, Broadway ads, Coca-Cola, and celebrity endorsements. But today, one billboard made her freeze. The sharp, confident face of Daniel Rivera gazed down at the city. He wore a navy suit, smiling with a mix of charm and distance. Next to the words, "Rivera Homes, affordable housing for all." IPO below, it was the logo of his company, the same real estate app that had once been nothing more than a dream when he was crashing on a couch in Brooklyn. Emma felt her blood rush to her head. She pulled out her earbuds as if the podcast could distort reality. Daniel, the man who vanished without a word, was now a billionaire? She remembered those nights he spoke passionately about his app, his eyes lighting up when he talked about helping the poor find homes. She had believed in that dream, believed in him. But then he disappeared, leaving her with a vintage ring and a broken heart. She stood motionless in the crowd, not noticing the light had turned green until someone bumped into her. "Watch it, lady," a man grumbled. Emma mumbled an apology and hurried across the street, trying to push Daniel's image out of her mind. At Mount Sinai, Emma threw herself into work to shake off the shock. The neurology ER was always hectic, filled with stroke patients needing rapid treatment. She reviewed charts, consulted with colleagues, and mentored interns with the precision of someone molded by thousands of overnight shifts. But in the quiet moments, when she was typing reports in the staff room, memories of Daniel resurfaced. She wondered where he had been all these years and why he never reached out. She'd once searched for him on social media, but he'd erased every trace. Now he was everywhere, on the city's largest billboard. At the end of the morning shift, the department chair, Dr. Nguyen, called Emma into his office. "Doctor, Watson, you'll be taking on a new patient," he said, handing her a chart. "Mrs. Elena Rivera, 62, mild stroke, transferred from a local hospital. We have the best stroke unit in the region. She's stable, but needs close monitoring. Emma nodded and opened the file. The name Rivera made her pause, but she told herself it was just a coincidence. Rivera was a common surname, and New York was full of them. She entered room 412 with a professional smile. Mrs. Elena Rivera lay in bed, her silver hair neatly tied back, her warm brown eyes tired but kind. "Hello, Mrs. Rivera. I'm Dr. Watson," Emma greeted, checking the monitors. "We'll be running some tests to make sure everything is okay." Elena smiled weakly. "Thank you, doctor. You have such kind eyes." Emma blushed, unused to compliments from patients. She asked about Elena's symptoms, took notes diligently, and explained the treatment plan. The conversation went smoothly, but when Elena mentioned her son, "He should be visiting me this afternoon. He's busy, but always makes time for his mother." Emma felt her heart speed up. "What's your son's name?" she asked, trying to keep her tone steady. Elena smiled proudly. Daniel Rivera. He does something with housing I don't really understand, but he's famous now." Emma felt the floor tilt beneath her. She gripped the clipboard tightly, willing her hands not to shake. "I see. I understand," she replied, her voice slightly hoarse. She excused herself, saying she needed to check test results, but really she just needed to breathe. Out in the hallway, she leaned against the wall, her mind spinning. Not only had Daniel shown up on a billboard, his mother was now her patient. What kind of twisted game was fate playing? Emma spent the rest of her shift holding her emotions at bay. She reminded herself to stay professional. Daniel had left her 5 years ago, and whatever the reason, she was no longer that naive girl. She was a doctor, and her duty was to care for Elena Rivera, regardless of who her son was. But each time she checked on Elena, old memories crept in. Picnics in Central Park, their first kiss in the rain, the anniversary night when she thought they'd be forever. She touched the vintage ring, now tucked away in her jewelry box at home, and wondered if Daniel ever thought of her. During her lunch break, Emma sat in the hospital cafeteria with Dr. Priya Sharma, her best friend and fellow resident. Priya, with sleek black hair and a sharp wit, immediately noticed Emma's distracted look. "You okay? You look like you've seen a ghost," Priya asked, sipping her coffee. Emma hesitated, then told her about the billboard. She didn't mention Elena. She wasn't ready to share that part yet. I didn't expect him to become that successful," Emma said, her voice tinged with bitterness. Priya raised an eyebrow. "Sounds like you haven't really gotten over that guy. Are you planning to see him?" Emma shook her head. I don't want to reopen old wounds." By late afternoon, Emma returned to Elena's room for a final check before her shift ended. Elena was watching a cooking show on TV, giggling when the host spilled flour everywhere. "Dr. Watson, do you cook?" Elena asked. Emma smiled. "I'm only good at making instant noodles, ma'am." They chatted for a few minutes and Emma felt comforted by Elena's warmth. But as she was about to leave, Elena said, "Daniel's on his way. You'll meet him. I bet you'll like him." Emma froze, nodding stiffly before walking quickly out. Back in the doctor's lounge, Emma sat down, her head in her hands. She didn't know how she would face Daniel. What would he say? Would he even recognize her? Or had he forgotten her completely, just like he'd erased her from his life 5 years ago? She checked the clock, 6 p.m. Her shift was technically over, but she stayed, reviewing Elena's chart again, just to delay the inevitable. What she didn't know was that out in the hallway, Daniel Rivera was already walking into the hospital, a suitcase rolling behind him, his face weary but filled with resolve as he came to see his mother. Chapter 3. Familiar Eyes, Cold Words. The afternoon sun streamed softly through the large windows of Mount Sinai Hospital, casting a warm glow over the neurology wing. The hall buzzed with footsteps, the beeping of machines and the calm, measured voices of doctors discussing patient cases. Emma Watson stood outside room 412, taking a deep breath to steady herself. She'd known since yesterday that Daniel Rivera, the man who once meant everything to her and then vanished without a word, would be visiting his mother, Elena Rivera. As a neurology resident, Emma couldn't let personal feelings interfere with her work, but her heart still pounded erratically at the thought of facing him. Elena lay in bed reading a paperback novel, her glasses slipping down her nose. She looked up and beamed when Emma walked in. "Dr. Watson, I was just telling the nurse about you. You make me feel at home." Emma smiled, checking the vitals on the screen. "You're too kind, Mrs. Rivera. How are you feeling today?" she asked, her tone professional but warm. Elena talked about how her headache had eased, and Emma made notes, explaining that the next MRI would help assess her stroke recovery. As Emma checked the heart monitor, the door creaked open. Daniel Rivera stepped in, pulling a small suitcase behind him, his gray suit wrinkled from the flight from San Francisco. He looked taller than Emma remembered, broader in the shoulders, but his deep brown eyes were unmistakable. Except now, they were cold, stripped of the light that once danced there when they dreamed together in Brooklyn. He looked at Emma, and for a moment, time stood still. Her throat went dry, fingers tightening around her clipboard. Daniel froze too, his face momentarily confused before hardening. "Daniel!" Elena exclaimed, opening her arms. He walked over and hugged her, but his eyes passed over Emma as if she were a stranger. "Hi, Mom, I'm here," he said gently to Elena, but when he turned to Emma, his voice was sharp. "Dr. Watson, right?" The way he said her name, like he'd never known her, was an invisible stab to the chest. Emma nodded, forcing a faint smile. "Yes, I'm your mother's attending physician." She launched into her report with clinical detachment. Blood test results, physical therapy plans, MRI schedule. Daniel listened, his eyes fixed on the floor, nodding curtly. When she finished, he spoke, his voice low and cold. "I'd like to request a different doctor, for personal reasons." Emma's heart clenched, but she kept her expression neutral. Elena, sipping water, set the glass down and frowned. "A different doctor?" "Absolutely not, Daniel. Dr. Watson is excellent. I trust her, and she makes me feel safe. Don't make this difficult." Daniel opened his mouth to argue, but Elena's firm gaze shut him down. "Mom, I'm just trying to do what's best for you." "I know what's best for me. Dr. Watson stays." Emma, caught in the crossfire, finally spoke. "If Mr. Rivera feels uncomfortable, I can arrange—" "No," Elena interrupted. "I want you to stay. I trust you." Emma nodded, thanked Elena, and excused herself to check the test schedule, when really she just needed to breathe. Back in the staff room, Emma sat down, head in her hands. Daniel's coldness hit her like a punch to the chest. He hadn't just left her 5 years ago. He was now looking at her like she was nothing. Worse, he wanted her gone from his mother's life. She thought of the nights in Brooklyn, sharing spaghetti in his tiny apartment. The night he knelt under the street lamp in Prospect Park and proposed with that old ring. How could he forget? She once believed he truly loved her. But his sudden disappearance after their anniversary made her question everything. Had she only been a passing fling? Emma opened her phone and looked at an old photo, her and Daniel laughing beside the Central Park lake, then quickly locked the screen, afraid the tears might come. An hour later, she returned to Elena's room with updated test results. Daniel was still there, seated by his mother's bed, scrolling through his phone. He looked up when she entered, and this time, his gaze lingered for a moment, like he was searching for something in her. Emma kept her tone clinical. "Her vitals are stable, but we'll continue to monitor for a few more days." Elena nodded, then looked at Daniel. "See? Dr. Watson knows what she's doing." As Emma adjusted the IV line, Elena began to reminisce. "Daniel, you need to relax a little. You've been working too hard ever since you got hurt a few years back." She paused, choosing her words carefully. "That girl, you never told me much, but I know it changed you. You stopped trusting people." Emma froze, her hand still on the chart. That girl, was it her or someone after her? The thought pierced her like a needle. She glanced at Daniel, but he only clenched his jaw, eyes glued to the window. "Mom, that doesn't matter anymore," he said tersely. Elena sighed. "I just want you to be happy, like you used to be." Emma's heart beat faster. She wanted to ask, "Why did you leave? Why didn't you let me explain?" But she wasn't the girl who once loved him. She was his mother's doctor. She continued reviewing dietary guidelines, her voice even. When she finished and turned to leave, Daniel stood as if to say something, but only gave a stiff nod. "Thank you, doctor," he said, his voice emotionless. Emma walked out feeling like she had just weathered a storm. That night, in her small Upper East Side apartment, Emma lay in bed staring at the ceiling. Elena's words echoed in her head. Daniel got hurt? Over what? She used to think she was the only one left broken after he disappeared. But now she wondered, was there something she didn't know? She opened her jewelry box and pulled out the old ring, her fingers tracing the small blue stone. She'd considered throwing it away so many times, but she never could. It was a relic of a love she once believed would last forever. She told herself to forget Daniel, but her heart wouldn't listen. Elsewhere in a midtown hotel room, Daniel sat by the window, staring at Manhattan's glowing skyline. He held a glass of whiskey but didn't drink. Emma's face, framed by her white coat, her soft voice speaking gently to his mother, haunted him. He'd thought he'd buried that love beneath years of work and billion-dollar deals, but today, looking at her again, he felt his heart betray him. He remembered her smile in Central Park, the night she said yes to his proposal. But then he remembered her in another man's arms in Liam's text. "She's already moved on, buddy." He clenched the glass, telling himself she wasn't worth the pain anymore. But deep down, he knew he was only lying to himself. Chapter 4. The Brother. Night had fallen over Mount Sinai Hospital, the fluorescent lights casting a sterile glow across the neurology wing, where the rhythmic shuffle of footsteps and nurses' voices filled the air. Emma Watson, just finishing a long shift, stood in the patient lounge, her blonde hair pulled into a messy ponytail, her eyes tired but lighting up at the sight of her brother, Mark. A tall, broad-shouldered former Marine, Mark smiled wide as he approached. "You look like you just ran a marathon," he teased, pulling her into a quick hug. Emma chuckled, giving him a light punch on the arm. "And you look like you walked straight out of an action movie. Why so late?" Mark shrugged. "Just finished a veterans meeting in Queens. Thought I'd swing by before heading home. Mom says you're working yourself to death." Emma rolled her eyes and led him to the waiting area, where a few patient families were seated. She suddenly spotted Dr. Priya Sharma, her colleague and best friend, emerging from the break room. "Priya," Emma called, waving her over. "Come meet my brother." Priya, with her sleek black hair and mischievous smile, approached. Emma grinned as she introduced them. "This is Mark, my brother. He just got back from deployment. He loves surprising me unannounced." Mark extended a hand, smiling. "Pleasure to meet you. Emma talks about you all the time. Nothing but good things, don't worry." Priya laughed. "So she didn't mention the time I stole her cookies in the cafeteria, huh?" They all burst out laughing, their voices echoing gently in the quiet lounge. Emma felt lighter, as if Mark's presence were a balm after the emotional weight of facing Daniel Rivera again. She hadn't forgotten the coldness in his eyes earlier that day when he'd asked for her to be removed as his mother's doctor. The pain from 5 years ago, when Daniel vanished after their anniversary night, resurfaced, making her question whether he had ever truly loved her. At that very moment, Daniel Rivera walked into the hospital, a charcoal overcoat draped over his wrinkled suit, his face weary after a long day of investor meetings in Manhattan. He came late to visit his mother, carrying a box of her favorite chestnut cookies. As he passed the waiting area, he stopped cold. Just 10 feet away stood Emma, laughing with a tall man. The man, short-cropped brown hair, strong build, khaki jacket, was the same one Daniel had seen hugging Emma outside her apartment 5 years ago. That image, along with Liam's damning message, "She's got someone else, buddy," had haunted him like an unhealed scar. Daniel's grip tightened around the box, a wave of pain and regret washing over him. He looked at Emma, beautiful in her teal cardigan, smiling in that way he once believed was reserved only for him. The man beside her, the way he laughed with her, it had to be her husband. They looked so happy, like a perfect little family. He told himself he'd been right to leave, that she'd moved on quickly, but his heart betrayed him, tightening with a pain he thought he'd buried. He was about to turn away, until Emma's voice rang out, clear in the quiet space. "Priya, this is my brother Mark," she said, emphasizing brother with a hint of pride. Daniel froze as if struck by lightning. Brother? He turned back, eyes fixed on Mark, then shifted to Emma. Priya said something about Mark looking like a movie star, but Daniel didn't hear it. His mind spun. The man he saw hugging Emma in that photo Liam had sent. That was her brother. The man he'd believed was her lover. For 5 years, he'd lived with the conviction that Emma had betrayed him, and now the truth hit him like a punch to the gut. Daniel stood still, his hands trembling, nearly dropping the cookie box. He wanted to walk over, to say something, but shame and guilt flooded him. He had left her, blocked her number, erased her from his life without giving her a chance to explain. He watched her laugh with Mark and Priya and saw her expression soften into something more wistful, her gaze drifting off. She didn't know he was there, didn't know he had just realized the greatest mistake of his life. Daniel entered Elena's room quickly, trying to mask the storm within. She was watching TV and smiled warmly when she saw him. "My cookies?" she asked, pointing at the box. Daniel nodded, setting it down, though his mind was far away. "You doing okay, Mom?" he asked, his voice raspy. Elena nodded and began talking about Emma. "Doctor, Watson is wonderful, Daniel. She's patient. Told me all about her favorite Italian dishes. You should talk to her." Daniel just muttered an absent, "Yeah," his eyes distant. His mother's praise only fueled the fire inside him. That night back in his Midtown hotel room, Daniel opened his laptop and scrolled through old messages from Liam, now a washed-up competitor in the real estate scene. He found the message from 5 years ago, with that blurry photo of Emma and Mark. "She's got someone else, buddy," Liam had written, topped with a smirking emoji. Daniel's jaw clenched as he recalled the rivalry, how Liam had tried to buy out his startup and when refused resorted to sabotage. That photo, Daniel now realized, had been part of a dirty play. He called Liam, voice ice cold. "The photo from 5 years ago, where did you get it?" Liam, now a second-rate entrepreneur, scoffed over the phone. "Oh, that? Just a lucky shot, Rivera. You were overly sensitive. I figured I'd help you wake up." Daniel growled. "That was her brother, you bastard. You knew." There was a pause before Liam chuckled. "So what? You didn't ask her. You ran off all on your own." Daniel ended the call and slammed the phone onto the bed. Liam had said one thing right. Daniel never asked. He had chosen to believe the worst, driven by insecurity and pride. Daniel sat by the window, gazing out at Manhattan's blinking lights. He reached for the diamond ring, the one he'd meant to replace the vintage band all those years ago. He ran a finger over the stone, guilt burning like fire in his chest. He thought of Emma's smile today, the way she spoke gently to his mother. She didn't deserve the silence he'd given her all these years. But how could he face her now? How could he apologize for destroying what they had? He considered texting her, calling, showing up at the hospital right then, but every thought was drowned by fear. Fear that she'd moved on, that she wouldn't forgive him. He looked at the ring, whispering into the night, "Emma, I was wrong." But for now, those words were just quiet regret in the dark. Still following the story? If this story found you outside of Soul Stories, we invite you home, to where every touching tale begins with truth, hope, and heart. Chapter 5, A Mother's Confession. Early morning sunlight filtered through the curtains of room 412 at Mount Sinai Hospital, casting soft golden streaks across the floor. Elena Rivera, 62, sat propped against her pillows, her cheeks rosier than they'd been days before. Her mild stroke was now under control, and she was recovering well, thanks to the attentive care of neurology resident Emma Watson. Emma walked in wearing a crisp white coat, her smile professional yet warm. "Good morning, Mrs. Rivera. How are you feeling today?" she asked, glancing at the monitor. Elena lowered her paperback novel, her glasses slipping down her nose. "Much better thanks to you, Dr. Watson. You know, I dreamed last night that I was making tiramisu at home. Maybe I should teach you the recipe." Emma chuckled and sat beside the bed. "I'm afraid I'd burn the kitchen down, but I'll try as long as you promise to supervise." Elena's warmth made Emma feel at ease, as if she were more of a relative than a patient. But every time she looked into Elena's kind brown eyes, Emma saw traces of Daniel, the man who had shattered her heart 5 years ago. and whose cold gaze yesterday had reopened every wound. As Emma checked Elena's vitals, the older woman began to speak in a soft, thoughtful voice. "You remind me of Daniel, my son, when he was younger. He used to be so open, always dreaming, but something changed a few years ago." Emma froze, her hand pausing on the monitor. She kept her expression neutral, though her heart was racing. Elena continued, her eyes distant. "After a heartbreak, he moved to San Francisco and buried himself in work. I haven't seen him fall in love since. He swore he'd never let anyone hurt him again." Emma swallowed hard, pretending to take notes. "Heartbreak?" she asked, her voice slightly shaky. Elena nodded. "He never told me the details, but I know he was deeply hurt. My Daniel, he doesn't believe in love anymore." Her words cut through Emma like a blade. Was she the girl in Elena's story, or had Daniel fallen for someone else after he left her? He had disappeared the night after their anniversary. No call, no explanation, just blocked her number and erased her from his life. Emma had always believed she was the only one left broken, but now she wondered if Daniel too carried scars. Forcing a tight smile, she changed the subject. "You should get more rest, Mrs. Rivera. I'll check in again later." She left the room feeling like the air had been sucked from her lungs. By noon, Emma stood in the hallway, gazing out the window at the crowded Manhattan street below. She couldn't focus. Her mind was flooded with images of Daniel. His cold tone yesterday when he asked to switch doctors still echoed in her ears. And yet Elena's words left her rattled. If he was truly heartbroken, why didn't he let me explain? She remembered all the times she had tried to reach him, the unanswered calls, the nights she cried in her tiny apartment, wondering what she'd done wrong. Eventually she gave up, telling herself he wasn't worth it. But now she wondered, could she have tried harder? That evening she returned to Elena's room with updated test results. Daniel was already there, seated by his mother's bedside, a hardcover book in hand. He wore a dark blue shirt with the sleeves rolled up, less rigid than the suit from the day before. "Dr. Watson," he greeted, his voice steady but less cold. Emma nodded, meeting his gaze for a brief moment before turning to Elena. "Your numbers look great. At this rate, you may be ready for discharge in just a few days." Elena clapped her hands. "Wonderful! Did you hear that, Daniel? I'll be home making cookies for you in no time." Daniel smiled at his mother. As Emma prepared to leave, he stood and handed Elena the book. "Here's that one you liked. The Girl on the Train. I found it at a bookstore nearby." Then turning to Emma, he hesitated. "Dr. Watson, could I speak with you for a moment?" Emma stiffened. Her heart thudded. She nodded and led him into the hallway, where the beeping of monitors and nurses' voices created a soft background hum. Under the fluorescent lights, Daniel stood facing her, hands in his pockets, his gaze uneasy. I wanted to apologize," he said, his voice low and hesitant. "For yesterday. I shouldn't have asked for another doctor. I just didn't expect to see you again." Emma looked at him, trying to keep her face composed as old pain surged forward. "It's fine, Mr. Rivera. I understand." She paused, then added with a sharper edge, "But if you're uncomfortable, I can still transfer your mother's care to someone else." Daniel shook his head and stepped closer. "No, that's not it. He took a deep breath and finally met her eyes. "I should have trusted you, Emma, 5 years ago. I was wrong to walk away." Emma felt the heat rush to her face. His apology, late as it was, felt like reopening a barely healed wound. She clenched her fists. "You didn't just walk away, Daniel. You erased me from your life. No words, no explanation. Do you think an apology now makes it right?" Daniel lowered his head as if her words were a blow. "I know I don't deserve it," he said hoarsely, "but He faltered, at a loss for words. Emma shook her head, tears threatening to fall, but she held them back. "Thank you for the apology, but I have work to do." She turned and walked swiftly down the hall, leaving Daniel standing alone, regret heavy in his eyes. Back in Elena's room, she sensed the tension as Daniel returned, his face shadowed. "What's wrong, son?" she asked, setting the book aside. Daniel sat beside her and took her hand. "It's nothing, Mom. Just work." Elena frowned, unconvinced. "I know you, Daniel. Something's bothering you. That doctor, She's kind, but I can tell you acts strange around her. Daniel remained silent, and Elena spoke again, gently. Life's too short to cling to old wounds. If something's broken, son, fix it. Daniel nodded, saying nothing. Her words stirred the shame that had haunted him since last night, when he realized Emma hadn't betrayed him. The man he'd seen her hug, that was her brother Mark. And the photo Liam had sent, the lie that fueled his bitterness. It had all been part of a dirty trick, and he had let it convince him to abandon her. Now, faced with a chance to make it right, he hesitated, afraid that Emma would never forgive him. That night, Emma lay on her sofa, city lights bleeding through her apartment window. She held the vintage ring, the blue stone catching the glow. Daniel's apology echoed in her mind, but it didn't dull the pain. She remembered how it felt to be left behind. She hadn't looked for him. She had stayed silent, convinced he wasn't worth the effort. But Elena's words now haunted her. Maybe he was hurting too. Could she have done more? Should she have searched for him instead of letting the pain consume her? She set the ring down and stared out the window, where Manhattan sparkled like scattered stars. What she didn't know was that, just blocks away in a midtown hotel, Daniel was staring out another window, murmuring to the night, "How do you fix something when it was all your fault?" Chapter 6. A silhouette beneath the hallway lights. Evening at Mount Sinai Hospital bathed the neurology wing in a soft fluorescent glow, casting gentle reflections across the polished tile floors. Daniel Rivera, 29, walked the corridor with a paper bag of coffee from a cafe near his Midtown hotel in hand. He had come to visit his mother, but his thoughts were still tangled from his conversation with Emma Watson the day before. His hesitant apology and her cutting response. "You erased me from your life," still echoed like a relentless reminder of the mistake he made 5 years ago. He knew now that he had been wrong, that he'd believed a lie. Liam's photo of her hugging her brother Mark, an assumed betrayal where there was none. But how could he fix anything when she looked at him with those hurt-filled eyes? As he turned into the hallway that led to Elena's room, Daniel froze. Under the dim overhead lights, Emma stood just outside the doctor's break room, speaking with a man. He looked to be around 30, with neatly combed black hair, dressed in a white coat, exuding confident ease. Daniel recognized him. Doctor Ryan Carter, a neurosurgeon he'd seen at yesterday's department meeting when Elena was being evaluated. Ryan was saying something, his hand resting casually on Emma's shoulder. She laughed, just a soft laugh, but bright enough to sting. Ryan leaned in closer, his voice low and smooth, and Emma nodded, her eyes sparkling as though caught in the pull of his words. Daniel felt a heat rise to his face. He clenched the coffee bag, the paper crinkling tightly in his grip. Ryan was clearly flirting with Emma. The way he touched her, the way he smiled, it was too easy, too familiar. Daniel stood rooted, his chest tightening with an old familiar feeling. Jealousy, laced with fear. He remembered 5 years ago when he'd seen her in Mark's arms and assumed the worst. This time he knew Mark was her brother, but Ryan wasn't. Ryan was successful, composed, and a doctor. A far better fit for Emma than a man who had once abandoned her without a word. Had she moved on? Had she found happiness with someone else? Had he already lost his chance for good? He wanted to step in, interrupt, say something, but his feet wouldn't move. Emma wasn't his anymore. Maybe she never was, not after what he did. But when Ryan handed her a cup of coffee from the nearby vending machine, and she smiled in gratitude, Daniel's heart shattered a little more. He turned away, trying to breathe, but the image etched itself into his mind. Emma, radiant and content in the company of someone else. Inside Elena's room, Daniel tried to bury his emotions. She looked up from her knitting and gave him a concerned smile. "You look like you've seen a ghost, son. What's wrong?" Daniel set the coffee down, forcing a grin. "Nothing, Mom. Just tired." But Elena, with a mother's intuition, narrowed her eyes. "You can't fool me. Does this have something to do with Doctor Watson? You act strange every time she's around." Daniel sat beside her, eyes distant. He wanted to tell her everything. About Emma, about the mistake, the guilt, the fear clawing at him. But all he said was, I'll be okay, Mom. Elena sighed and placed her knitting aside. I don't know what happened, but I can see the way she looks at you. There's something there, something deeper than doctor and patient's family. If you still feel something for her, don't let fear hold you back. Daniel nodded, but her words only tangled his thoughts further. He was afraid Emma had found joy again, afraid she would never forgive him. Leaving Elena's room, Daniel stepped back into the hallway, hoping not to run into Emma, or worse, Ryan. But fate had other plans. Emma appeared from around the corner, alone this time, carrying a clipboard, her expression tired but gentle. Mr. Rivera, she said, her tone professional. How is Mrs. Rivera doing? Daniel looked at her, heart pounding. He wanted to ask about Ryan, to know if she had someone new in her life, but all he managed to say was, she's doing well, thank you. Emma nodded and began to walk past him, but Daniel blurted out, You working late tonight? She raised her brows, surprised by the question. Yes, double shift. I'm used to it. She paused as if about to say more, then simply gave a faint smile. Good night, Mr. Rivera. She walked past him, the familiar scent of her jasmine and wood perfume brushing against him. Daniel turned, watching her silhouette fade into the hallway. That sense of loss swelled again in his chest. He had let her slip away once, not because of a photo this time, but because of his own fear. That night in his midtown hotel room, Daniel lay on the bed, the flickering city lights outside the window casting dancing shadows across the walls. The image of Emma laughing with Ryan haunted him, but he knew jealousy couldn't fix the past. He had misunderstood her once, and now, when he still had a chance to make it right, he was letting fear silence him again. He whispered into the dark, Emma, I can't lose you again. But he knew, before he could try to win her back, he had to stop running from himself. Chapter 7, Misunderstanding Beneath the Gala Lights. On a May evening, Manhattan's Plaza Hotel gleamed with lights, welcoming Mount Sinai Hospital's annual charity gala to raise stroke awareness. The grand hall sparkled beneath crystal chandeliers as soft jazz mingled with the chatter of doctors, donors, and patients. Emma Watson stood near the stroke research display, her deep blue gown accentuating her graceful figure, blonde hair elegantly tied up. She had been tasked with presenting a short seminar during the gala, and her co-presenter was Daniel Rivera. Dressed in a black tuxedo, Daniel adjusted the microphone awkwardly at the podium. Invited as the newly successful CEO of Rivera Homes, a real estate tech company that had just gone public, and as the son of current stroke patient Elena Rivera, Daniel was asked to share a personal story to encourage donations to the hospital's stroke center. When my mother had a stroke, he began, voice slightly shaky, I realized that medical research isn't just about numbers. It's about hope for the people we love. A paper slipped from his hand, drawing light laughter from the crowd. Emma, standing beside him, whispered, Just pretend you're talking to your mom. Daniel smiled, steadied himself, and finished with a heartfelt appeal. Let's help give more people like my mother another chance. Applause filled the room, and as they stepped down from the stage, Emma teased, Not bad, Mr. CEO. Just try not to drop your speech next time. Daniel laughed, his eyes glimmering like they once had in Brooklyn. Only when you're standing there, making me nervous. For a brief moment, the wall between them cracked, letting in the warmth of what once was. But that warmth didn't last. During the intermission, Emma stood near the ballroom's edge, holding a glass of white wine, watching Daniel across the room near the donor area. He was speaking with an elegant woman, Claire Thompson, early 30s, in a striking red gown. Claire, director of the Thompson Foundation, laughed brightly, lightly touching Daniel's arm as he said something amusing. They stood close, too close, and Daniel smiled in a way Emma remembered as meant only for her. Her chest tightened, jealousy flaring with a sharp sting of doubt. Just yesterday, he had apologized for disappearing 5 years ago, and now he was flirting with someone else right in front of her. Was his apology just empty words? Emma gripped her glass tightly, the bitterness of betrayal rising again. Just as she had begun to open her heart to the idea of reconciliation, he gave her reason to question it. Claire tilted her head, hair brushing over her shoulder, and Daniel laughed louder. Emma set her glass down and quietly left the gala, stepping onto Fifth Avenue where neon lights and honking cabs couldn't drown the storm inside her. The next morning in the hospital cafeteria, Emma sat across from Priya Sharma. Priya, munching on toast, immediately noticed Emma's gloomy expression. "You disappeared early from the gala. What happened?" Priya asked. Emma sighed and recounted the scene with Daniel and Claire. "I think he was flirting with her, Priya. Maybe I was stupid to believe he wanted to make things right." Priya burst out laughing. "Claire Thompson, director of the Thompson Foundation? She's married, Emma. 2 kids. She and Daniel were just talking about a donation to the stroke center. I overheard them. She's pledging a huge contribution." Emma blinked, heat rushing to her face. I misunderstood." Priya placed a hand on her shoulder. "You were jealous because you still love him, Emma. But you need to face those feelings, not run from them." Emma nodded slowly, but her heart remained tangled. That afternoon, Emma received a text from Daniel. "Do you have time for a coffee? I need to talk." She hesitated, the memory of his smile with Claire still fresh. But the sincerity in his message nudged her heart. She agreed. They met at a small cafe on Madison Avenue near the hospital, where the scent of roasted beans mingled with gentle acoustic music. Daniel, in a gray rolled-up shirt, sat across from her, a steaming cup between them. "Emma, I need to talk about what happened 5 years ago," he began, voice low and steady. He explained everything. About Liam, his rival who sent the photo of her hugging Mark, and how his own insecurities, as a broke startup founder, made him believe she had moved on. "I saw you with your brother, but I didn't know he was your brother. Liam's message made me believe you had someone else. I was wrong, Emma. I never stopped loving you." Emma listened quietly, fingers turning her cup, her heart pounding. His explanation shed light on 5 years of pain, but it didn't erase the scar. "Daniel," she said, voice trembling slightly, "you didn't just misunderstand. You chose not to ask me. You didn't give me a chance. I waited for you, but you erased me." She paused. "I need time to trust you again." Daniel nodded, eyes filled with remorse. "I'll wait, Emma, as long as it takes." They parted in silence. No promises, no guarantees. But somewhere, between regret and redemption, a fragile thread of hope remained. Chapter 8. The Ring Returns. Late May, the neurology wing at Mount Sinai Hospital pulsed with tension. The beeping of monitors and hurried footsteps of nurses echoed through the halls. Emma Watson stood in the operating room, her sharp eyes locked on the MRI display. Elena Rivera had suddenly deteriorated due to a new blood clot. As the neurology resident on call, Emma had been working nonstop for hours, coordinating with a team of specialists to perform a thrombolysis procedure, administering clot-busting medication that demanded flawless precision. Sweat dotted her brow as she spoke with lead surgeon Dr. Nguyen. "We have 30 minutes to save her," she said, voice low but steady. Inside the OR, Emma double-checked the dosage, monitored Elena's vitals, and directed the team with calm authority. Elena, though weak, reached for Emma's hand before the anesthesia took hold. "I trust you, Doctor Watson," she whispered. Those words lit a fire in Emma's chest, driving her through exhaustion. After 3 tense hours, the procedure was a success. Elena was stabilized and moved to recovery, her vitals gradually improving. Emma stepped out of the room, leaning against the wall, exhaling deeply. She wiped her brow, legs trembling from fatigue, but a faint smile played at her lips. Elena would be okay. Daniel Rivera stood in the hallway, his hand gripping his phone, face tight with worry. A nurse had called him with the news, and for 3 hours, he'd paced outside the OR, unable to leave. When Dr. Nguyen finally told him Elena was stable, Daniel nearly collapsed with relief. "Thank you," he murmured. "Dr. Watson led the case," Dr. Nguyen replied. "She didn't stop for a second." Daniel nodded, his heart heavy. Emma, the woman he'd walked away from 5 years ago, the one he'd apologized to but hadn't yet won back, had just saved his mother. He found her in the hospital garden, a quiet pocket of green among Manhattan's concrete towers. She was slumped on a wooden bench, her white coat wrinkled, blonde hair tousled, eyes closed in exhaustion. A half-drunk cup of coffee sat beside her. Daniel approached softly, careful not to startle her. "Emma," he said gently. She opened her eyes, surprised. "Daniel? Your mother, is she okay?" Her voice was hoarse with fatigue. He nodded and sat beside her. "Thanks to you. Thank you, Emma. I don't know what else to say." Emma gave a faint smile, her gaze distant. Daniel studied her, noticing how drained she looked. He reached into his pocket and handed her a water bottle. "Drink. You look like you're about to collapse." She hesitated, then accepted it, taking a small sip. "Thanks," she whispered. They sat in silence for a moment, the soft chirping of birds and distant city sounds blending in the background. Daniel took a deep breath, gathering his courage. "Emma, I failed you once," he began, his voice low. 5 years ago, I promised I'd give you a ring worthy of you when my startup made it. When I signed my first deal in Boston, I bought a diamond ring. For you. But when I came back, I misunderstood. I never gave it to you. I couldn't throw it away, though. It was a promise I hadn't kept." From his jacket, he pulled out a small velvet box and opened it. Inside, a brilliant cut diamond ring sparkled in the afternoon light. Far from the vintage silver ring he had once offered her under the street lamp in Prospect Park. Emma stared at the ring, heart pounding. She remembered that night, his nervous smile, the old ring, the future they'd dreamt of. She also remembered the pain that followed when he disappeared, when every call went unanswered. This diamond ring, as dazzling as the promise he once made, brought tears to her eyes. "Daniel," she said, voice trembling, "I'm touched. Truly. But I'm scared. Scared you'll leave again. Scared I'm not strong enough to survive it twice." She paused, inhaling shakily. "I need time. To heal. To believe in you again." Daniel nodded, remorseful but resolute. "I understand. I'll wait, Emma. As long as it takes." He gently placed the box in her hand, folding her fingers around it. "Keep it. When you're ready, I'll still be here." Emma gripped the box, feeling the cool velvet beneath her palm. She didn't respond, but a small part of her, the part that still loved him, wanted to believe he meant it. Daniel stood, taking off his jacket and draping it over her shoulders to shield her from the evening breeze. "You need rest," he said softly. He called a cab and insisted on taking her home, despite her protests. In the car, Emma leaned against the window, the ring box in her lap, her heart tangled in emotion. Daniel sat quietly beside her, stealing glances as if trying to memorize her all over again. At her apartment, Emma stepped inside and turned back. "Thank you for everything," she said. Daniel smiled, sincerity in his eyes. "Good night, Emma." As the door closed, Emma stood still, then opened the ring box. The diamond sparkled like a star, echoing the promise he had once made in Boston, but never delivered. She placed it beside the old silver ring in her jewelry box, one symbolizing pain, the other an uncertain future. Sitting on the sofa, streetlights dancing through the window, she felt something stir inside her, a fragile glimmer of hope. At his Midtown hotel, Daniel sat by the window, watching Manhattan's glittering skyline. He thought of Emma, her composure in the OR, the fatigue in her eyes, the quiet strength in that garden bench. He remembered her teasing smile on the gala stage, and his jealousy when he saw her with Ryan. The diamond ring he'd bought in Boston had been a silent vow he clung to, even when he believed she'd betrayed him. Tonight, he had finally given it to her. He picked up his phone and sent a message. "Thank you for saving my mother. I'll wait for you, Emma." He didn't expect a reply, but for the first time in 5 years, his heart felt lighter. You're watching Soul Stories, exclusive to our channel. If you're still with us, drop a comment. We read and cherish them all. Subscribe to support more heartfelt original stories. Thanks for being part of the Soul Stories family. Chapter 9, A Message in the Lights. Summer blanketed Manhattan in golden sunshine, and Emma walked the familiar streets with a new sense of clarity. For the past 2 months, she and Daniel had slowly started over, not as the dreamy young couple they once were, but as two grown people, cautious but full of hope. Their relationship had resumed quietly. Nights sharing pizza in Greenwich Village, walks along the Hudson River, and long conversations about dreams, fears, and old wounds. Emma still carried the diamond ring Daniel had given her in the hospital garden. Not on her finger, but close, as a reminder of a promise he was trying to keep. Daniel, with a patience she never imagined he possessed, honored her boundaries and rebuilt trust one step at a time. With every meeting, Emma felt her heart opening more, though the fear of being left behind still lingered. Daniel, now CEO of Rivera Homes, remained busy with million-dollar deals, yet always made time for her. A surprise bouquet of daisies, a text asking if she'd eaten lunch, a quiet evening watching classic movies in his apartment. He told her about his days in San Francisco, how he had drowned himself in work to forget the pain of what he thought was betrayal. Emma shared the nights she cried, questioning her worth when he disappeared. These conversations, raw and honest, stitched them back together, two broken pieces finally mending. One July morning, Emma crossed through Times Square on her way to Mount Sinai Hospital, a medical podcast in her ears, her white coat tucked into her backpack. She stopped at the corner of 42nd Street, waiting for the light to change, her eyes drifting upward to the towering digital billboards. Suddenly, she froze. Her earbuds slipped from her hands. A massive sign lit up. No photo, just large white text on a blue background. Emma Watson, I love you. Will you marry me? For real this time? Her name, bold and glowing, shimmered in the heart of Times Square, watched by thousands. The crowd began to murmur. Applause, cheers. A voice shouted, "Say yes, Emma!" Emma stood frozen, tears streaming down her cheeks, a laugh bubbling up from somewhere deep inside. She turned, and there he was. Daniel stood just a few feet away, near a newsstand, holding a single red rose. His white shirt sleeves were rolled up, his eyes anxious, but filled with love. Emma ran toward him, ignoring the shouting crowd. He caught her in his arms and she whispered through tears, "Yes, Daniel, yes." He held her tightly as if she might vanish, and kissed her forehead. The crowd erupted, cheers, clapping, laughter, a quintessential New York moment. Loud, public, unforgettable. Daniel handed her the rose, whispering, "This time it's forever, Emma." She nodded, her eyes glittering with tears. After 5 painful years, they had found their way back to each other. 3 months later, on a soft autumn afternoon, Central Park glowed with red and gold maple leaves. Emma and Daniel held a small wedding ceremony at Bow Bridge, the water below sparkling in the sunlight. Emma wore a simple white dress, the diamond ring, purchased in Boston 5 years ago, now shining on her finger, next to the vintage silver one that once symbolized a first promise. Daniel, in a navy suit, never took his eyes off her, his smile wide as the day they first met at that Brooklyn cafe. Only a few close friends and family were present, her parents, her brother. Elena, now fully recovered, sat in the front row, her eyes full of pride. A few close colleagues. Priya Sharma stood beside the bride, teasing, "If the cake's not good, I'm stealing the whole thing." When Emma and Daniel exchanged vows, their voices trembled, but their words rang clear. "I used to think love was a fragile dream," Emma said, looking into Daniel's eyes, "but you showed me it can be repaired if we're brave enough." Daniel replied, "I promise to spend the rest of my life making you happy, Emma." After the ceremony, they danced under lanterns strung between trees, the sound of violins filling the crisp air. Elena pulled Emma into a hug and whispered, "Thank you for saving me and for saving my son." Emma smiled, eyes red. Mark clapped Daniel on the shoulder, saying, "Don't make my sister cry again, man." Daniel nodded, gripping Emma's hand even tighter. At the same time, Emma received exciting news. A neurology research grant from the American Medical Association, recognizing her work in early stroke intervention. At Mount Sinai, she was promoted to consulting physician, a major step forward in her career. Daniel, in gratitude for the hospital's role in saving his mother and in honor of Emma's dedication, announced that Rivera Homes would donate 10% of annual profits to stroke research. At a press conference, he held Emma's hand and said, "She didn't just save my mother, she gave me a reason to believe in love again. I hope this gift helps others find hope too, like we did." That night, Emma and Daniel sat on the balcony of their new apartment in Chelsea, watching the Manhattan skyline sparkle like scattered stars. Emma leaned her head on his shoulder. She thought of the billboard in Times Square, of saying yes, and of all the nights she believed their love was lost. "Did you ever think we'd make it here?" she asked softly. Daniel kissed her hair. "I always hoped, but I knew I had to earn it." They fell silent, the city lights around them glowing like chapters of their story. A love broken by misunderstanding, pieced back together through forgiveness and courage. Emma held Daniel's hand, feeling his warmth. And for the first time, she wasn't afraid. The future was uncertain, but it was theirs, and they would write it together.